video, I'm heading down to the Outer Banks in North Carolina once again, and this time I'm bringing two cameras, my Leica M4-2, which you may have seen in my most recent video, and my trusty old Mamiya 7. The Outer Banks is a very special place to me, and I love visiting here, trying to build on the photography project that I've been shooting for the last couple years there. And so I headed back around the time of the 4th of July with my friends Jimmy and Dave to spend the longest period of time at once that I've done so far out there, taking a ton of photos.
Stars and stripes, baby. Who knows what a kilometer is, because I don't.
Our first day after driving down from New Jersey was the 4th of July, which might be one of the busiest days all year round in the Outer Banks, and we spent pretty much the entire day walking the beach, during the day just photographing people, and at night watching the fireworks. I want to note that this is my very first trip at this point with the Leica M4-2. Before the footage that you're watching, I had only put a single test roll through the camera just to make sure that it worked, and I immediately packed my bags after that with a bunch of film and headed to the East Coast for the summer. And this Outer Banks trip is the start of that. Very early on into the trip though, I realized that this camera was something special and that this was quickly becoming a contender for maybe one of my favorite cameras ever. Funny enough, the fireworks were actually kind of a main attraction that brought us down to the Outer Banks this time of year. And somehow I think they were some of my worst photos. I had imagined that they would kind of shoot them off more at blue hour, but they really started once it was like super dark out, so it was incredibly contrasty and my exposure times were way too long, something like 30 seconds or a minute, and in that amount of time there was just way too many going off at once, so it just ended up being like this giant explosion of light. And yeah, not my best photos, but that was okay because the next day we woke up and we drove up in my friend Peter Jeffrey's Jeep to one of my favorite places in the Outer Banks, which is Corolla. And in Corolla, there are seemingly like endless miles of pristine beach that you can drive on. So we took Peter's Jeep up there, aired down the tires, and spent the day kind of cruising up and down that beach, photographing people, and it was super lively because it was the day after the 4th of July. Part of the routine for us on these Outer Banks trips is getting up for sunrises, and although I didn't get up for all 10 or 12 sunrises while we were there, I did get up for quite a few, and the light is just always so beautiful. For pretty much the last 5 or so years, I had a rule that I would only ever carry around one camera because I felt that multiple cameras were always distracting instead of being like an advantage. I felt like if I had 2 cameras, I was thinking more about which camera I should shoot the scene in front of me on instead of thinking about how I could take a better photo with the one camera that I had in my hand. It was like this question of gear versus a question of how to actually just take a better picture. So for like 5 years, I only ever carried pretty much the Mamiya 7. And I think this trip really changed that for me, specifically with the combination of the M4-2 and the Mamiya 7. The M4-2 was kind of for the fast-paced street photos throughout the day, and the Mamiya 7 was for the slower-paced photos of light and of the landscape at sunset and at sunrise. And this combination worked really nicely for me throughout the entire summer because the two cameras had a very clear, distinct purpose in my mind. So it was never which one should I be using right now. It was either the M4 for street photos or the Mamiya 7 for slow-paced landscape photos. And that worked really well for me, I think. Since we were here for such a long period of time, we were also bound to just run into some bad weather. And during that time, we went to places like the aquarium to try and take some photos that felt a little different and that could be done indoors. Something I'm really excited to share in this video is a bit of a side project that I've been working on all over the US, really outside of the Outer Banks as well, and it's a series of purple streetlight photos. I've shot quite a few of these images already in Los Angeles, and essentially what it is they're LED streetlights that originally get installed, and they're just like any other white LED streetlight, except a couple years down the road, the LEDs will fail, and a chemical problem in them causes them to turn purple. And so I've been collecting images of these purple street lamps whenever I can find them, which has been a really fun side project. And the problem is they're so hard to find, so I was very excited to find a couple actually in the Outer Banks. If you know any of these purple street lights, please send them my way, especially if they're in Los Angeles, but really I'll go anywhere in the US for them. Fun little side project, and I was pleasantly surprised to find some out in the Outer Banks. Come on. The frog sound is crazy.
Yeah, seriously.
Whatever the fuck that is.
Yo, there was crazy lightning behind you.
Really?
Yeah.
talking about right there.
Oh,
We're revived.
it's beautiful. It's a thing of beauty.
Let's go.
That's what we like to see, folks.
Ferry.
We got off the ferry, now we're getting right back on. One thing you'll see becoming a theme on this trip was us taking rides on the ferries, and this was for a couple reasons. One, they're free. Two, they give you a beautiful perspective out over the ocean, and the light's always really nice. And the third is that it's like an hour-long ride, and they're usually filled with tourists and locals, and everyone's usually having a pretty good time just relaxing, watching the ocean. And so it's a really fun place for some street photos, and we did quite a few ferry rides, as you'll see on this trip. The next day, I think Jimmy was working from home, and so Dave and I went out on the pier, and we got caught out in a rainstorm along with a bunch of people who were out fishing and some tourists. And I was debating whether or not to take photos because I had the Leica on me and it was pouring rain, and all that I had to cover it was my shirt. But I'm really glad I did, because these were some really fun pictures of people caught out in this rainstorm along with myself. Thankfully, the camera lived to see another day, and I was really glad that I risked it for these photos. My shirt.
That's my shirt.
Let's go, Jimmy! Let's go! Ready? Go. Yeah, there we go. Take a view. There was one sunrise in particular that was very memorable because the light was just so special on this morning. But it kind of started a little funny with me going out to take a bunch of photos, hopping out the car, which was air conditioned, and then stepping out into the humidity. And I started taking photos right away, not realizing that my lens hadn't acclimated to the humidity yet. And so all these photos are like super blurry and fuzzy with the layer of condensation that was on my lens. this point, we were also joined by Dave's girlfriend, Chris, and of course we had to take her on the ferry to Ocracoke because we'd been having so much fun this whole week riding that ferry back and forth. So we headed down to Hatteras one last time to ride the ferry around. While we were on the island Ocracoke, we met up with Robert, who's a photographer down there, and he took us for a ride in his Land Cruiser, which he's done once before, except this time it was freshly engine swapped. This is now my 7th trip out here, which means I'm in pretty deep into this project, and every time I come back saying this was the best trip yet. So there's no end in sight, I think, yet for this project, just because I keep coming back with images that feel so different every time. And I also love being there with Jimmy and Dave and Chris because it's such a fun dynamic with a bunch of photographers, especially because we shoot such different photos, which I always find fascinating, looking back at our images after each of the trips and seeing how different we end up shooting photos. I'll link them all down in the description so you can check out some of their images as well. If you're still watching at this point of the video, thank you so much for sticking around. I really appreciate it. And finally, I want to say thank you to Squarespace for sponsoring this video. Squarespace is an incredible all-in-one website building platform that you can use to build your photography portfolio online. I've been using Squarespace for so many years now, and they've made it so incredibly easy to build a website for my photography. My personal website features a ton of different projects that I've shot over the years, both personal and commissioned projects, and I even use it as a platform to sell my photography books and prints. If that sounds interesting, you can hit the link in my description for a 14-day free trial of Squarespace, and when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/Willem for 10% off your first purchase of a website or a domain. I'll see you guys next week with another video. Thank you for watching. Peace.
What up, Mr. Baklava? We haven't seen you in a while. It's great to see that smile. Your hair looks wonderful. Let me push this chair up under you. The weather's beautiful. You must have brought the sun with you. You're getting sleep.